Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, November 12th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Texas State Senate District 9, an election that took place last week that seemingly nobody was paying attention to. We briefly covered it on my channel when we were looking at the results as they poured in last week, on the Tuesday evening, looking at the election results from state to state. Texas had a state Senate district that had a result that showed the Democrats having a very strong overperformance relative to not just what the expectations were, but to the last presidential election and the last time that Texas held a state Senate race in District 9. Now, for a bit of context, the Texas State Senate races, while seemingly not as consequential as our conversations around House districts, around Senate races, around gubernatorial elections, and arguably it makes sense, right? We don't focus too heavily on that. But as it pertains to the state of Texas, what's interesting about the Texas State Senate is that its districts are actually larger than that of congressional districts on the national level. Texas has 31 state Senate districts construed all across the state, and what that essentially means, given that, Republicans are currently at 25 seats in the state of Texas, you can look at just the total number of electoral votes in the last cycle. They have 38 seats right now in Washington, D.C. on the congressional level. This Texas State Senate District 9 actually is more representative of more people in Texas and stands to be a great determinant as to what we've seen on the overall trend lines. Now, the headline that comes out of it about Texas State Senate heading to a runoff may not pique your interest at immediate glance, but it certainly should. What we know is that Texas's state Senate district is one, in District 9 in particular, is one that Republicans historically have done quite well in. In the last presidential election, compared to the result that we saw last Tuesday, we saw about a 12-point swing, roughly in line with the national average we've been seeing in congressional districts and special elections all across the country. And looking at how it had voted in the past, you can't help but realize that the narrowing and tightening up of this state Senate district is a benefit for the Democrats for obvious reason, and goes to show that shifts across states like Texas and around the country are certainly happening, and you can find them on full display in many of these special elections. And just thinking about how it voted in the last cycle, this state Senate district voted for Republicans and Donald Trump by 17.1%. The last time the state Senate election happened in this Senate district went to the Republicans by a whopping 30 points. Now, it was a slightly different set of boundaries, but looking at the 2024 result, you're working with the same exact circumstances, and it is a great one for the Democrats to go from being down 17 to now down just by 4.8 on a combined vote share. And it shows that the Democrat here was just 2 points away from winning this entire Senate seat outright. Democrats have very limited control when it comes down to the Texas State Senate, and being able to win this additional seat would put the Democrats at 12 rather than the 11 they have right now, and reduce the Republican seats from 18 down to 17 with 2 vacancies in the chamber. And that makes a huge difference. When you think about what has been happening in Texas, the reason why Republicans have been so successful is because they've been able to steamroll the Democrats in a multitude of elections, statewide, local, congressional districts, whatever it might be. But this would have been and continues to be a race that could be a full display of disaffection with the Republican candidates and Republican nominees statewide, as this is a district that Donald Trump won by 17, being reduced down to being won by less than 5. And that's a combined vote share. There is still going to be a runoff election that will have to be dictated timeline-wise by Governor Greg Abbott, to which you find here, too, that Taylor Remmett, who ended up winning the plurality of the vote in the state of Texas in this district, came up to 48%, being the least funded candidate in this race by a mile. When you take a look at the amount of money that has been put forth in this race, you'll see that the Republican John Huffman was the candidate who had raised the most money. Remember, this is larger than a congressional district. We know congressional districts hold, huge portions of amounts of money that are being invested in by different PACs, different groups, different candidates, and oftentimes it can raise millions upon millions of dollars. Well, Texas, having larger state Senate districts, does the exact same thing. And John Huffman, who is the Republican that came in a distant third place with 16% of the vote, raised about $3.5 million on this race. On the flip side, you'll find that the Democrat who came in first place across this race raised less than $1 million. I mean, you are talking about real substantive differences in terms of fundraising, and it didn't benefit the Democratic Party. But ultimately, in terms of voting, Democrats came ahead. And so we'll have to see, closely watch what happens in this Texas race. Democrats shouldn't keep their hopes up, but the idea that they're able to get at 48% in a district like this, that gave Kamala Harris less than 42% of the vote in the last election, goes to show just how far the Democratic Party has come. Meaning that they've been able to reduce the amount of support that Republicans have had, even in one-off elections like this in Texas, that seemingly nobody pays attention to until they have to. And it is the Democrats who are locking in on this race. Because like many of the elections we just saw take place in Texas, these results were unexpected in a multitude of ways. In New Jersey, we weren't expecting that the Democrats would win by 14. In Virginia, even, we weren't expecting that Spanberger would win by more than 15. In California, we weren't expecting that the Democrats would outperform not just Kamala Harris's margin, but Joe Biden's and Hillary Clinton's as well in the state, and might actually outperform all of the Democratic Party's margins across California in the 21st century. And the reason why that matters is because it shows that there is an appetite here for the Democratic Party and an appetite to vote against the Republicans. And it extends even into states like Texas that have quite interesting elections coming forth in the 2026 midterms. The first one I think of is the Texas Senate race that's set to embark us on a very fascinating journey on both sides of the aisle to see which party nominates the better candidate that they have. For the Democrats, that would be James Tallarico. For the Republicans, that would be John Cornyn. But given that the trajectory of the primaries are starting to shape up to be a Tallarico-Paxton matchup in Texas, it could be quite fascinating after all. Right, looking at the last Senate election in Texas in 2024, despite Donald Trump being on the ballot, Ted Cruz won by just 8.5%. If Texas's state Senate race is indicative of a larger statewide trend, which again, I caution you in drawing that conclusion, but we'll entertain it for the brief period in understanding how substantial that shift actually was. That would say if this shift was translated to everywhere across the state, Texas would have a Democratic senator in 2026. And that's why it matters. That's why it makes such a difference when you see results like these coming out of high population areas. More than 1 million people live in Texas's 9th state Senate district, right? So you are talking about a huge portion, a huge sizable portion of the American populace and the Texas populace living in a Trump plus 17 district, now finding itself being just Republican plus 4.8. If that isn't indicative of a damning shift for the GOP, I really don't know what is. Because this is the election I encourage you to closely watch as we see Greg Abbott set the standard for when the election is going to take place, and the result that we will see here will be one that will be utilized regardless if Democrats win it or not, as an undeniable trend towards the Democrats. Because this 12-point swing can be found elsewhere. I told you that in the special elections we've seen since Donald Trump has taken office, the average shift of the Senate, not just Senate district, but just any race, state House, state Senate, statewide election, right? The average shift here is about 12 points. And so the fact that it matches up isn't super shocking, but absolutely matters, because so far the Republicans have been using these talking points, Democrats winning in Democratic states, yada, yada, yada. What do we have to worry about? Well, arguably a lot, because it isn't just Democrats winning in Democratic states. They're doing it by margins that have not been seen in some cases for decades on end, not even in Donald Trump's first term. Not to mention that some of these flips are happening in red states. Look at Georgia. Look at Pennsylvania, where Democrats are going 3 for 3 by 19 points in the state Supreme Court races in Pennsylvania. That if Republicans who invested millions of dollars to try to change the outcome of that race had been successful, you would see Pennsylvania with a brand new congressional map tomorrow favoring the Republicans. In Georgia, 2 public service commissioner races that seemingly nobody cared about except the Democrats won those races by 25 points across the state, flipping them from the Republicans for the first time in decades. The reason I bring it up is to say that while the Republicans love the talking point that these swings and these outcomes only happen in Democratic areas, that very obviously is not the case, and this Texas race in particular is of unique interest, and arguably should be. The outcome is shocking, and one that I do think should wake up Democrats across the country. Because yes, it is impressive the results they've seen in 2025 in all of the high-profile races. But in many of the lower stakes ones, seemingly lower stakes, the results are as good for the Democratic Party, if not better. And if it comes down to a consideration about, how Democrats can maneuver through the next midterm elections, they will have to look to more, smaller races like these to see, okay, what went right in Texas State Senate District that they got 48% of the vote, despite in the last cycle getting significantly less. And what does it mean that the combined Republican vote share only amounts to a 4.5-point advantage over the Democrats, despite a 17-point advantage a year before this election had taken place? What really has changed? They should investigate into what they've seen in terms of trends changing amongst white voters, Latino voters, every single demographic group. Why is it that the driving force to the left has now been groups and communities that largely abandoned the left in 2024? Why is it that a shining beacon of hope and glimmer here for Democrats comes out of a state Senate district that no one on the Democratic side was even watching, when Republicans were spending millions upon millions to get out the vote in favor of their candidates and came up tremendously short? Why is it that that was the case? We'll have to wait and see. The autopsy on this will only happen once the election is finally concluded. But as it stands currently, my understanding of it is the Democratic Party turns out in elections where Republicans just simply are not paying attention. And as it stands to where we are right now, it's more than that too. Voters are angry. They're turning on the Republican Party. They're turning on Donald Trump, and they're taking it out in more ways than one. And they find it at the ballot box, and they find it in these state Senate districts that seemingly are inconsequential, but truly tell the tale of the time, which is an abandonment of Donald Trump and the Republican Party in today's day and age. And what these results show is quite a positive outcome for the Democratic Party and a glimmer of hope that they might be able to flip this race sometime in the future. And as it stands right now, doesn't seem nearly impossible, given that they're only at a 4-point deficit, despite a 17-point deficit roughly a year ago. And with more time, it seems possible that the Democratic Party could be successful even if they don't start out as the immediate favorites. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2026 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.